Hello and welcome back to the Green Dragon channel. I know it has been a little while, but I've been busy, okay? I've been playing a lot of Dungeons & Dragons and making a new website, which you should definitely check out. It's got blog posts, some links to where you can buy some art that I've made, and some more stuff about me and my writing, and all that kind of stuff. And I will put the link in the description, but please check that out. Now, for today's video, I am going to start a much requested, at least by my family members, series on one of my favorite fantasy series of all time. These books, each of these books is called a Tiffany Aching Adventure, but they're a part of the series by Terry Pratchett called the Discworld series. I haven't read them all. I need to because Terry Pratchett is one of my favorite authors of all time. Rest his soul. He passed away recently, and I was very sad. This book is amazing. There are 4 about this particular heroine. This one's called The Wee Free Men. Forewarning, I'm going to be doing a lot of accents, and I apologize to everyone and anyone who may be offended by the inaccuracy of them. Let's get started. Oh, and there's also a lot of footnotes and jumps between different places and story arcs, so I will pause to make sure that you understand when that is happening. The Wee Free Men by Terry Pratchett. Chapter 1. A Clang Well Done. Some things start before other things. It was a summer shower but didn't appear to know it, and it was pouring rain as fast as a winter storm. Miss Perspicacia Tick sat in what little shelter a raggedy hedge could give her, and explored the universe. She didn't notice the rain. Witches dried out quickly. The exploring of the universe was being done with a couple of twigs tied together with string, a stone with a hole in it, an egg, one of Miss Tick's stockings, which also had a hole in it, a pin, a piece of paper, and a tiny stub of pencil. Unlike wizards, witches learned to make do with a little. The items had been tied and twisted together to make a device. It moved oddly when she prodded it. One of the sticks seemed to pass right through the egg, for example, and came out the other side without leaving a mark. "Yes," she said quietly as rain poured off the rim of her hat. "There it is. A definite ripple in the walls of the world. Very worrying. There's probably another world making contact. That's never good. I ought to go there. But, according to my left elbow, there's a witch there already." "She'll sort it out, then," said a small and, for now, mysterious voice from somewhere near her feet. "No, it can't be right. That's chalk country over that way," said Miss Tick. "You can't grow a good witch on chalk. The stuff's barely harder than clay. You need good hard rock to grow a witch, believe me." Miss Tick shook her head, sending raindrops flying. "But my elbows are generally very reliable." Footnote. People say things like listen to your heart, but witches learn to listen to other things too. It's amazing what your kidneys can tell you. "Why talk about it? Let's go and see," said the voice. "We're not doing very well around here, are we?" That was true. The lowlands weren't good to witches. Miss Tick was making pennies by doing bits of medicine and misfortune telling. Footnote. Ordinary fortune tellers tell you what you want to happen. Witches tell you what's going to happen whether you want it to or not. Strangely enough, witches tend to be more accurate but less popular. And slept in barns most nights. She'd twice been thrown into ponds. "I can't barge in," she said. "Not on other witches' territory. That never, ever works. But," she paused, "witches don't just turn up out of nowhere. Let's have a look." She pulled a cracked saucer out of her pocket and tipped it into the rainwater that had collected on her hat. Then she took a bottle of ink out of another pocket and poured in just enough to turn the water black. She cupped it in her hands to keep the raindrops out and listened to her ears. A jump. Tiffany Aching was lying on her stomach by the river, tickling trout. She liked to hear them laugh. It came up in bubbles. A little way away, where the river bank became a sort of pebble beach, her brother, Wentworth, was messing around with a stick, and almost certainly making himself sticky. Anything could make Wentworth sticky. Washed and dried and left in the middle of a clean floor for 5 minutes, Wentworth would be sticky. It didn't just seem to come from anywhere. He just got sticky. But he was an easy child to mind, provided you stopped him from eating frogs. There was a small part of Tiffany's brain that wasn't too certain about the name Tiffany. She was 9 years old and felt that Tiffany was going to be a hard name to live up to. Besides, she decided only last week that she wanted to be a witch when she grew up, and she was certain Tiffany just wouldn't work. People would laugh. Another and larger part of Tiffany's brain was thinking of the word sorceress. It was a word that not many people have thought about, ever. As her fingers rubbed the trout under its chin, she rolled the word around and around in her head. Sorceress. According to her grandmother's dictionary, it meant a low, soft sound, as of whispering or muttering. Tiffany liked the taste of the word. It made her think of mysterious people in long cloaks, whispering important secrets behind a door. Sorceress. She'd read the dictionary all the way through. No one told her you weren't supposed to. As she thought this, she realized that the happy trout had swum away. But something else was in the water, only a few inches from her face. It was a round basket, no bigger than half a coconut shell, coated with something to block up the holes and make it float. A little man, only 6 inches high, was standing up in it. He had a mass of untidy red hair into which a few feathers, beads, and bits of cloth had been woven. He had a red beard, which was pretty much as bad as the hair. The rest of him, that wasn't covered with blue tattoos, was covered with a tiny kilt, and he was waving a fist at her and shouted, "Cravens, get away to hear you daft wee, innit? Where the green head?" With that, he pulled at a piece of string that was hanging over the side of the boat, and a second red-headed man surfaced, gulping air. "Nae time for fishing," said the first man, hauling him aboard. "The greenhead's coming." "Cravens," said the swimmer, water pouring off him. "Let's off ski." And with that he grabbed one very small oar, and with rapid back-and-forth movements made her basket speed away. "Excuse me," Tiffany shouted. "Are you fairies?" But there was no answer. The little round boat had disappeared in the reeds. Probably not, Tiffany decided. Then, to her dark delight, there was a sorceress. There was no wind, but the leaves on the alder bushes by the riverbank began to shake and rustle. So did the reeds. They didn't bend, they just blurred. Everything blurred, as if something had picked up the world and was shaking it. The air fizzed. People whispered behind closed doors. The water began to bubble just under the bank. It wasn't very deep here. It would only have reached Tiffany's knees if she'd waded, but it was suddenly darker and greener, and somehow much deeper. She stood and took a couple of steps backward just before a long, skinny arms fountained out of the water and clawed madly at the bank where she had been. For a moment she saw a thin face with long, sharp teeth, huge round eyes, and dripping green hair like waterweed, and then the thing plunged back into the depths. By the time the water closed over it, Tiffany was already running along the bank to the little beach where Wentworth was making frog pies. She snatched up the child just as a stream of bubbles came around the curve in the bank. Once again the water boiled, the green-haired creature shot up, and the long arms clawed at the mud. Then it screamed and dropped back into the water. "I want to go a toilet!" screamed Wentworth. Tiffany ignored him. She was watching the river with a thoughtful expression. "I'm not scared at all," she thought. "How strange. I ought to be scared, but I'm just angry. I mean, I can feel the scared like a red, hot ball, but the angry isn't letting it out." Wanna go a toilet!" Wentworth shrieked. "Go on then," said Tiffany absent-mindedly. The ripples were still sloshing against the bank. There was no point in telling anyone about this. Everyone would just say what an imagination the child has, or if they were feeling in a good mood, or don't tell stories if they weren't. I can speak English. She was still very angry. How dare a monster turn up in the river, especially one so ridiculous? Who did it think it was? This is Tiffany walking back home. Start with the boots. They are big and heavy boots. much repaired by her father, and they belonged to various sisters before her. She wears several pairs of socks to keep them on. They are big. Tiffany sometimes feels she is nothing more than a way of moving boots around. Then there is the dress. It has been owned by many sisters as well, and has been taken up, taken in, taken out, taken down by her mother so many times that it really ought to have been taken away. But Tiffany rather likes it. It comes down to her ankles, and whatever color it had been to start with is now a milky blue that is, incidentally, exactly the same color as the butterflies skittering beside the path. Then there is Tiffany's face. Light pink with brown eyes and brown hair. Nothing special. Her head might strike anyone watching, as in a saucer of black water, for example, as being just slightly too big for the rest of her, but perhaps she'll grow into it. And then go farther up and farther, until the track becomes a ribbon, and Tiffany and her brother become two little dots, and there is her country. They call it the chalk. Green downlands roll under the hot midsummer sun. From up here the flocks of sheep, moving slowly, drift over the short turf like clouds on a green sky. Here and there sheepdogs speed over the grass like shooting stars. And then, as the eyes pull back, it is a long green mound, lying in like a great whale on the world, surrounded by the inky rainwater in the saucer. Jump. Miss Tick looked up. "That little creature in the boat was a Knack McFeegle," she said. "The most feared of all the fairy races. Even trolls run away from the wee free men, and one of them warned her." "She's the witch, then, is she?" said the voice. "At that age, impossible," said Miss Tick. "There's been no one to teach her. There are no witches on the chalk, it's too soft. And yet, she wasn't scared." The rain had stopped. Miss Tick looked up at the chalk rising above the low, wrung-out clouds. It was about 5 miles away. "This child needs watching," she said. "But chalk's too soft to grow a witch on." Jump. Only the mountains were higher than the chalk. They stood sharp and purple and gray, streaming long trails of snow from their traps, even in summer. "Brides of the sky," Granny Aching had called them once, and it was so rare that she ever said anything at all, let alone anything that didn't have to do with sheep, that Tiffany had remembered it. Besides, it was exactly right. That's what the mountains looked like in the winter, when they were all in white and the snow streams blew like veils. Granny used old words and came out with old, odd sayings. She didn't call the downland the chalk, she called it the wold. Up on the wold the wind blows cold, Tiffany had thought, and the words had stuck that way. She arrived at the farm. People tended to leave Tiffany alone. There was nothing particularly cruel or unpleasant about this, but the farm was big, and everyone had their jobs to do, and she did hers very well, and so she became, in a way, invisible. She was the dairymaid, and good at it. She made better butter than her mother did, and people commented on how good she was with cheese. It was a talent. Sometimes, when the wandering teachers came to the village, she went and got a bit of education. But mostly she worked in the dairy, which was dark and cool. She enjoyed it. It meant she was doing something for the farm. It was actually called the home farm. Her father rented it from the baron, who owned the land, but there had been Achings farming it for hundreds of years, and so, her father said, quietly sometimes after he'd had a beer in the evenings, as far as the land knew, it was owned by the Achings. Tiffany's mother used to tell him not to speak like that, although the baron was always very respectful to Mr. Aching since Granny had died 2 years ago, calling him the finest shepherd in these hills, and was generally held by the people in the village to be not too bad these days. It paid to be respectful, said Tiffany's mother. The poor man had sorrows of his own. But sometimes her father insisted that there had been Achings, or Achins, or Arkins, or Achins, or Achins, spelling had been optional, mentioned in old documents about the area for hundreds and hundreds of years. They had these hills in their bones, he said, and they'd always been shepherds. Tiffany felt quite proud of this, in an odd way, because it might also be nice to be proud of the fact that your ancestors moved around a bit, too, or occasionally tried new things. But you've got to be proud of something. And for as long as she could remember, she'd heard her father, an otherwise quiet, slow man, make the joke, the one that must have been handed down from Aching to Aching for hundreds of years. He'd say, "Another day of work and I'm still aching," or get up aching and I go to bed aching, or even I'm aching all over. They weren't particularly funny after about the third time, but she'd miss it if he didn't say it at least once of them every week. They didn't have to be funny, they were father jokes. Dad jokes. Anyway, however they were spelled, all her ancestors had been aching to stay, not aching to leave. There was no one around in the kitchen. Her mother had probably gone out to the shearing pens with a bite of lunch for the men who were shearing this week. Her sisters, Hannah and Fastidia, were up there too, rolling fleeces and paying attention to some of the younger men. Who names their child Fastidia? I mean, fastidious is a virtue, I guess, but... Hannah and Tiffany are quite sensible names. They were always quite eager to work during shearing. Wow, wow, wow. Near the big black stove was the shelf that was still called Granny Aching's library by her mother, who liked the idea of having a library. Everyone else called it Granny's shelf. It was a small shelf, since the books were wedged between a jar of crystallized ginger and the china shepherdess that Tiffany had won at the fair when she was 6. There were only 5 books if you didn't include the big farm diary, which in Tiffany's view didn't count as a real book because you had to write it yourself. There was the dictionary, there was the almanac, which got changed every year, and next to that was Diseases of the Sheep, which was fat with the bookmarks that her grandmother had put there. Granny Aching had been an expert on sheep, even though she called them just bag of bones, eyeballs, and teeth, looking for new ways to die. Other shepherds would walk miles to get her to come and cure their beasts of ailments. They said she had the touch, although she just said that the best medicine for sheep or men was a dose of turpentine, a good cussin', and a kick. Bits of paper with Granny's own recipes for sheep cures stuck out all over the book. Mostly they involved turpentine, but some included cussin'. Next to the book on sheep was a thin little volume called Flowers of the Chalk. The turf of the downs was full of tiny, intricate flowers like cowslips and harebells, and even smaller ones that somehow survived the grazing. On the chalk, flowers had to be tough and cunning to survive the sheep in the winter blizzards. Someone had colored in the flowers a long time ago. On the flyleaf of the book was written in neat handwriting Sarah Grizzle, which had been Granny's name before she was married. She had probably thought that Aching was at least better than Grizzle. And finally, there was The Good Child's Book of Fairy Tales, so old that it belonged to an age when there were far more E's around. Tiffany stood on a chair and took it down. She turned the pages until she found the one she was looking for and stared at it for a while. Then she put the book back, replaced the chair, and opened the crockery cupboard. She found a soup plate, went over to a drawer, took out the tape measure her mother used for dressmaking, and measured the plate. She said. 8 inches. Why didn't they just say? She unhooked the largest frying pan, the one that could cook breakfast for half a dozen people all at once, and took some candies from the jar on the dresser and put them in an old paper bag. Then, to Wentworth's sullen bewilderment, she took him by a sticky hand and headed back down toward the stream. Things still looked very normal down there, but she was not going to let that fool her. All the trout had fled and the birds weren't singing. She found a place on the riverbank with the right-sized bush. Then she found a stone and hammered a piece of wood into the ground as hard as she could, close to the edge of the water. And she tied the bag of sweets to it. Tiffany was the kind of child who always carried a piece of string. "Candy, Wentworth!" she shouted. She gripped the frying pan and stepped smartly behind the bush. Wentworth trotted over to the sweets and tried to pick up the bag. It wouldn't move. "I want to go a toilet!" he yelled, because it was a threat that usually worked. His fat fingers scrabbled at the knots. Tiffany watched the water carefully. Was it getting darker? Was it getting greener? Was that just waterweed down there? Were those bubbles just a trout laughing? No. She ran out of her hiding place with the frying pan swinging like a bat. The screaming monster leaping out of the water met the frying pan coming the other way with a clang. It was a good clang, with the oing that is the mark of a clang well done. The creature hung there for a moment, a few teeth and bits of green weed splashing into the water, and then slid down slowly and sank with some massive bubbles. The water cleared, and was once again the same old river, shallow and icy cold and floored with pebbles. "What a one of sweeties!" screamed Wentworth, who never noticed anything else in the presence of sweets. Tiffany undid the string and gave them to him. He ate them far too quickly, as he always did with sweets. She waited until he was sick, then went back home in a thoughtful state of mind. In the reeds, quite low down, small voices whispered, "Criven's wee Bobby, did you not see that? Aye, we'd better off ski and tell the big man we've just found the hag." I think I'm going to stop. Yeah, I'm stopping there. That's a long chapter. Alrighty. Today's dragon that I didn't introduce last time we were reading the Drury and Dole Canterbury Tales is this little guy. This is Bentley. He is one of the oldest of the dragons, actually, despite his demeanor. And he is kind of Horatio's best friend. At least Horatio thinks so. Bentley doesn't like him very much. He thinks he's an egotistical prat, but yeah, that's Bentley. And there's only one more dragon after this, unless I get another one to add to the family before next time. Alrighty. Don't forget to check out my website. Again, description down below. And I will see you next time. Farewell.